So, welcome to the podcast, Judy.
Thank you.
I would, after seeing your presentation yesterday, I would introduce you just as a Jedi Master, but maybe that's not how you usually present yourself.
No, I don't usually present myself as Jedi Master. Usually Jedi Mistress.
Oh, yeah. Let me start over.
No, it's nice to be talking to you, and I gather from your online profiles that you are a master listener yourself.
Yeah, I like I like to think it's my superpower, sort of. But sorry, we should introduce you first. Things in the right order.
Yeah. So, what would be useful for your listeners to know?
What do you like to be known for?
I'm known for lots of things. Some of the things I'm known for include facilitating remote meetings rather well.
Yeah.
I was the co-author of a book called Clean Language, which has been selling well for about 10 years.
Yeah.
And as a result of paying attention a few years ago, I was one of the people who named the Good Friday Agreement.
Ah. Yeah, paying attention, it helps, doesn't it?
Yeah. So, like Woody was saying in his talk yesterday, good things come to those who pay attention.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. So I used to have my business name used to be X-Ray Listening.
Ah.
My YouTube channel still is called X-Ray Listening. But I decided that to stop calling it X-Ray Listening because listening has such a low status in the world.
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
Everyone thinks they're a good listener. Mm-hmm. After all, if they were not a good listener, how would they know?
Yeah, it's a tricky one.
So trying to sell listening to anybody was just a waste of time.
Yeah, I bet.
It's just a low status thing. Everybody thinks they can do it already.
Yeah.
And yet we have an epidemic of people failing to pay attention and therefore not noticing things that need to be noticed.
Yeah. Do you think it's getting better or worse?
I think it's getting worse.
You think so? Because I started thinking that, spontaneously I agree completely. It's difficult to listen. People don't think much about it. But what makes me think that maybe it's getting a little bit better is that it feels to me that people are at least becoming a little bit more aware of it. One of my friends I talked to before, he shared the revelation when I think I just mentioned your presentation without going into the details, and he said that someone had said to him while that person was talking and kept saying stuff, and he was listening, and then the other person asked, "Are you listening, or are you just waiting for your turn?" And I feel like if people start making that comment, there's some kind of awareness building, perhaps.
Yeah, I think within the tech community, there are a lot of people talking about it now, which is a really important thing.
Yeah.
Olaf Lewitz, for example, says, I don't know who he's quoting, I really must find out from him. He says that somebody he works with says the definition of listening is don't talk and don't think about talking.
Yeah.
And the fact is that most people who pretend to be listening, most of the time, all they're doing is waiting for their opportunity to talk. And that's it. And they don't pay attention. Or they're thinking about all the other things that are going on, and they're not paying attention to the person in front of them.
Yeah.
And when they do pay attention to the person in front of them, they might actually learn something.
Yeah.
But the reason I think it's getting worse is that there is a relationship between the two talks I've done here. One was the one about getting them to get it, so understanding the other person in order for you to understand them enough to convince them of something. That influence and persuasion requires a certain amount of knowledge of the other person to work well. So that and remote meetings. In remote meetings, typically people are doing a dozen other things apart from paying attention to the meeting.
Yeah, it's so much easier to do.
And actually, we need to develop our skill in paying attention. It doesn't happen automatically.
No.
Like Chris was saying in his talk this morning that everybody has to. Human beings are designed to be distracted. We're designed to pay attention in multiple directions. If we weren't, we'd have been eaten by saber-toothed tigers or whatever long ago. So we're supposed to follow our curiosity and notice things. Therefore, it's against our programming to pay complete attention to anything or anybody.
Yeah, it's really tricky.
In order to get good at it, it requires an awareness of the thing, that this is a thing to learn to do, and then you have to practice.
Yeah.
Unless you do that, you won't get better at it.
Yeah, and also getting comfortable, I guess, finding people who are comfortable speaking in a way that's good to listen to, I guess, as well. Because I don't think you're necessarily a good speaker just because you occupy most of the space in a conversation. So there is something there too, I guess.
And there are people who do a lot of talking, who actually do their thinking by talking.
Oh, yes. Yes.
There are not that. I don't think that's a particularly common way of doing within the programmer community.
No, maybe not. No.
But it certainly is in, for example, sales. You'll find a lot of people who they think of themselves as thinking on their feet.
Yeah.
What they actually do is only know what they think when it comes out of their mouths.
Yeah.
And that means in order to do any deep thinking, they have to do lots and lots of talking, and they take up all the airtime.
Yeah,
it's infuriating.
Yeah, and then I feel like, I just need a break to gather my own thoughts. And then they're done, and they ask, what do you think? And I don't know yet. I haven't had the time to think about it. So and we did a couple of interesting little exercises during your talk as well, at first.
Yeah, so doing any exercises in a conference like this is a bit weird, because people are trained to sit still and listen, but not listen in the way I'm talking about, where they actually pay complete attention, but just to sit quietly and let the talk wash over them. And to me, that isn't listening.
No.
I think listening, or more properly paying attention, is an active pursuit. So whenever I do a talk at these conferences, and people don't always like it, but I always make sure there are things that people do. So one of the things we did was 2 minutes of listening each way. So one person, their job is to keep the other person talking without using words for 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And then we swap roles and do it the other way. Some people find that really, really hard to listen for that long.
Yeah, I think for me and my partner, the big problem was getting started. It's like, what can I talk about? I have nothing to talk about. But this other person was really interesting. I wish I got to ask questions.
So then the second activity, I did get you asking questions.
Yeah.
Which were these lazy Jedi questions. What did you notice in that activity?
Well, actually, for some reason, I felt that was more difficult, because we had these 2 questions we could ask. But I wanted to ask other questions right away, because now I'm allowed to say something, but I can only choose these 2. And it's kind of difficult as well, because you had just listed them and sort of pointed them out, so to speak. And that almost makes them feel a bit comical, because you can make it as a sort of comical reaction. Say, yes, what kind of questions?
The first time you do anything, it's awkward and uncomfortable. That's the nature of the thing.
Yeah.
What I love about those questions is how pared back they are.
Yeah.
There's nothing there apart from what kind of, and then the other person's words.
Yeah.
Or is there anything else about, and then the other person's words. There's just that simplicity.
Yeah.
Now, I can use them for hours at a time, and
of course.
and because I'm so used to them. My belief is that it's well worth persevering.
Yeah.
Now, you are obviously someone who's done a lot of... You're well practiced at listening, and you can encourage and direct attention by a look or a nod or these kind.
Well, possibly.
For a lot of people, a question is a much more precise tool and they find it much easier to pick up a question and go in with a question, certainly than repeating back the other person's words, which is what I was suggesting is that the activity we didn't do yesterday, I sometimes do at conferences, but people find it so difficult.
Oh, yeah.
Which is just repeating back the other person's words.
Yeah.
And when you do that, it is also possible to direct the other person's attention with great precision.
Yeah, with great, like, I guess, empathy or something like that. It's not roughly trying to push the conversation or something.
And it's typically completely invisible to the other person.
Yeah.
As are the questions when you get good at it.
Yeah.
But because people were doing it as an activity, an exercise, they find it too uncomfortable. They go, oh, no, I'm not doing that. No. Don't know why she's asked to do that. No.
Now, I wonder if it would be easier to do if only half the group were informed about it. Maybe it's easier to try it out if I don't know that the other person just heard the same thing.
Worth a try, potentially. I haven't tried it.
Kind of uncomfortable to divide the group first.
Can't work out how to do that in practice.
No. Nice theory, hopeless in practice.
But the point about the just repeating back their words is that's what Chris Voss, who wrote this rather excellent book about negotiation called Never Split the Difference, he was talking about that is the nearest thing the FBI have to a Jedi mind trick.
Yeah.
And it really works. It's completely invisible. You can go on for literally ages just using the other person's words and they don't even notice. And you can also use it as an interruption technique. So if you've got one of those gas-bagging people who keep talking, one of the things I can do, because I've done it a long time and it's worth practicing this, is if you match their words, so you're just repeating back alongside them while they keep talking, you match their words. And like an echo.
Yeah.
And eventually you'll notice them start to follow you just a little. At that point, you can, without drawing breath, at the end of a repeat back, you can put a question or state an opinion of your own and completely divert the discourse.
Yeah.
It's just like putting a great big rock in a river.
Yeah.
And it goes off in a completely new direction that you...
Yeah, and this is things I really want to try because I feel like, maybe I've been trying to do stuff like this, but I haven't had the words or the tools to reason about it. But this is things I really want. I wanted to do already. Somehow, steering people gently and...
Yeah, so that idea, having the tools to reason about conversation, about questions, about listening, about attention and guiding attention, I think that's one of the biggest things about this weird thing called clean language. So you look it up online, you'll get lost in all the things that are talked about clean language online, because it is so many things and it's used by so many people for so many different things. But the underlying thing is that it gives us a method of talking about and addressing some of these questions about what do you do with attention, because it reduces the number of variables. If I was to throw in there and say, all you need to do is just use any questions you can think of and the other person's words, we wouldn't learn anything because there'd be just too much going on.
Yeah.
Whereas if you can reduce it down to a few simple questions and reduce the variables down, you can see what's happening.
Yeah.
So I was doing some team development days last week in the UK, and at a certain point during the day, I get all these different 3 or 4 models up on the wall, so they can see. And the Lazy Jedi questions are one, and there's another one which is called the 1-minute motivation model, and something else which is about directing someone's attention away from problems and towards outcomes. It's got nicknamed the switcheroo question.
Oh.
So these little tiny models derived from clean language. Get them looking at all of this. What is it that these things have in common? And you won't see it in everybody's eyes, but for a proportion of the people, a penny suddenly drops. And they say, if I've only got these simple questions, suddenly I can realize what's going on in a conversation. I can see how it works. I'm playing with a metaphor at the moment. I don't know whether this works, but it's like teaching clean language is like showing people a big pile of autumn leaves. And you'll get some groups, you'll show them a pile of autumn leaves, and they'll just go, oh, excellent, and they'll leap into it and rush about like dogs or small children and throw the leaves about, and that'll be great, and that's what they like to have. They like to have fun with leaves. And other groups, you'll show them all these leaves, and they'll go, oh, we know what to do with leaves, and they'll get out their leaf blower, and they'll get out their big garden vacuum cleaner, and they'll get out their rake, and they'll move the leaves about. And that's what some groups do. Then you'll get people who catch the first level of interest of clean language, and they will start to use the questions to find out about the leaves. And they'll start to look closely at the leaves, and they'll notice all the beautiful colours and the patterns and the structures. And then they'll start to notice the relationships between the leaves and how the leaves stack on each other and and then they'll notice the pile, and they'll start to be amazed by the detail of the pile, how beautiful it is. And then you get the people who really get it, who start to understand that what clean language can do that the leaf blower can't do, and a camera can't do, and a microscope can't do. What clean language can do is allow you to see through the leaves to what's going underneath the leaves without disturbing the leaves.
Seeing the structure.
So you can see where there might be a structure of paths underneath, or there might be a whole community of what gets nicknamed in the UK mini beasts.
That's nice.
Going on underneath. And if you swept the leaves away, you won't be able to see any of those insects or all that stuff. It's a whole community going on.
Yeah, you ruined it.
You ruin it if you pull it all out of the way. Clean language allows you to see the detail of the leaves, to see the pile, see all the relationships, and to see what's underneath without disturbing it all.
Yeah, and sort of sorting it a little bit if needed.
So I think that's why clean language is valuable, not because it forces you to not use your own words, which it does if you're using it fully, but because once you do that, you can start to see how everything hangs together.
Yeah. And it feels like... Yeah, exactly. It feels like it's not in any way about forcing something. It's so gentle, sort of.
So if one of those insects underneath the leaf pile, you wanted to influence them, what's the best way to do it? Is it to sweep away the leaves, let's say, you insect, you must.
Pick it up with a tweezer.
Yeah, and put it in your matchbox or whatever it is. Or, go with the insect's way of life and say, actually, I understand. You live under there. Yeah. That's how you do. Right, if I want you to move, I need to set it up like this.
Yeah. Did you know what's over there is also interesting? Yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of different things you can do once you know how the thing works.
Yeah. And I feel like I'll be able to find out more things as well. It feels like a way to find out more information, ask sort of better questions without necessarily knowing the goal. Yeah. I mean, if I ask a really directed question, I can only get an answer relating to what I was expecting, perhaps. But if I can ask a much more gentle, perhaps more loosely defined question in relation to what you just said, I can find out something that I had no idea about.
Exactly.
In the first place.
One of my husband's ex-colleague used to have a really annoying habit. Every question he asked was always, is it this or is it that?
Oh, yeah. I think I've done that before as well.
Is it this or is it that? Is it bread or is it butter? Is it tea or is it coffee? Yeah. There was no opening for anyone else ever to have to say anything because he decided there were only two options and he knew what they were.
It's so easy to fall into. So how did you come to all this with clean language? How did you sort of discover it?
Well, it's not my thing.
No?
No, it was created by David Grove, who died a few years ago. And he came to it because he was a psychotherapist, and he was trying to find a way of finding out what's going on in people's heads without disturbing it.
Yeah, a noble goal.
And enabling them to heal themselves, so to create an environment where they could do their own mental healing without him going in with his size 9s. Because that's too much responsibility, isn't it? When people have had trauma and all that kind of thing. It's like you don't want to be getting in there and stirring their brains around.
No, that's the last thing anyone needs.
But if you can ask them some questions to gently open up their frame of reference, to invite them to have more options than perhaps the 2 options they were seeing.
Yeah.
And it's a bit like shining a torch, and if you can use your questions to move the torch so that the circle of light gets bigger and bigger, then the person learns a lot more about themselves and where they want to go and what they might want to do and all that kind of thing. That was what he was doing.
Yeah.
I bumped into clean language when I was working as a news journalist.
Oh.
Where, of course, I'd asked lots and lots of questions over the years. But I was not a TV news journalist shoving microphones in people's faces. I was originally a local newspaper journalist. And one of the things about local newspapers was that when we were trained, we were told, everyone out there's got a story. Everyone in every patch, no matter how godforsaken the corner of the country you're going to be working in when you do your first job, everyone you meet has got a story. Yeah. It's your job to find it and tell it. Mm-hmm. And it turned out to be true. We used to go out, when I was training, we used to go out onto this local estate near the college we were training in, which was, it was pulled down a couple of years later because the buildings were condemned. But we used to go out there and meet the people and just try and find the stories they had. Yeah. And we produced a local newspaper for this estate, and it was always really, really interesting.
Yeah, I believe it.
So that was the kind of journalist I originally was one who went out finding stories from ordinary people to tell. And hence, when I bumped into clean language, I thought, ooh,
this
makes sense to me. Clean language also has an interesting bunch of stuff around metaphor, which we probably won't go into here, but it's fascinating. Yeah. And because my father had been doing some research into metaphor when I was a teenager, again, it pressed all sorts of buttons for me. When this uses metaphor in the way I understand metaphor. So yes, when I bumped into clean language, I was instantly hooked. Now, where it ties back to software development was at that particular time I was working for Teletext, which the Nordic countries have Teletext. Yeah, the text service lurking behind the picture on the TV.
Oh, yes. Yeah? Text TV, it's called in Sweden.
Does it still exist in Sweden?
It might. It did exist very recently anyway.
For most countries, it's been switched off when they've gone to digital TV because you don't want the backstory of Teletext. Fascinating though it is.
Yeah, we link it.
Now, like so many of our technologies, Teletext was first used for sending rude messages between the operators.
Of course.
And only later used for porn. Anyway, I was working for the Teletext I was working for in London was a very, very large media organisation. Teletext at that time was a huge service. It was just the internet was starting to take off. We had 20 million viewers. Teletext TVs were in every newsroom everywhere around the country. For every newspaper, I mean, everyone watched Teletext for their news, for their sport, all that stuff. But we could see that with the web and with mobile phones, with digital TV, we were coming to the end of our time. We were going to be switched off. Yeah. So we were in a frantic rush to try and get ourselves onto the new platforms. And I was working, I was what would nowadays be called a product owner. I was working as a member of the editorial team trying with the software developers, trying to work out how do we create these products and services and the back-end systems that would be required to make them run. And I was too late. We failed. We didn't have agile processes in those days. We attempted to do a waterfall process, which was a complete disaster, and we failed. And as a result, I ended up leaving Teletext, but at the same time as I met Clean Language. And I could instantly see, if only we'd had that, if only we'd had those questions to sort out some of the business analysis stuff that was so badly done in that project, it would have made all the difference. We might just have succeeded.
I mean, I came away thinking that this is in so many ways so much more both interesting and important than many of the things I sort of bury myself in and think of as problems in day-to-day work as a developer.
What kind of problems do you bury yourself in?
I mean, everything from, plain code problems, like how do I solve this in a good way? And then there's, all kinds of like problem analysis or feature requests or, on whichever level, there's always this use of asking clearer or finding out more, getting a clearer picture, getting a better understanding. Getting me to get it. That's the thing I always want to get better at. So it's...
And that whole thing about if you can understand the problem space better, you're going to come up with a new level of solution.
Yeah, exactly. And there's probably a whole bunch of problems I wouldn't need to solve in the first place because I would be putting something else in there instead. Perhaps removing stuff.
And of course, Clean Language is designed for use with human complex systems.
Yeah.
It's designed for use with humans.
Yeah.
It works really well when it's applied to humans. I don't know what happens when it's applied to code.
But I think, that's an interesting question too. But my feeling is that the code will, melt away in many parts as a problem because I feel like most of the problems we build in code is because of other misunderstandings. Of course, we have straight bugs where something crashes, but most of the stuff that people perceive as a problem or report as a problem, at least for us, is, human understanding of the output or something. It's not a technical bug. It's we should have clarified this or we solved the wrong problem. Stuff like that is like the vast majority of the challenge. A bug is a bug. We can fix it. That's easy.
Yeah, to get people to define their own problems, and even more to get people to define what they really want.
Yeah.
I think it's attributed to Steve Jobs, isn't it? If you ask people what they want, they...
Oh, yeah.
I can't remember the exact quote.
The faster horse thing.
Yeah.
No,
that's Henry Ford.
Yeah.
There's a Steve Jobs version of the same thing. But basically, people typically are not able to easily say what they want. That's true, certainly for technical solutions. I know from my experience as a coach and from my experience training Clean Language to lots of people, which means lots of people practicing lots of Clean Language, people are really rubbish at saying what they want in all kinds of domains of their lives. Yes. And Clean Language turns out to be a really effective tool for helping them to work out what they want. Yeah. So if it works for helping people to work out what they want when it comes to, career or life goals or all those kind of things, my guess is it will work really well for helping people to say what they want when it comes to technical solutions.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. I think we need some workshops as work.
Well, of course, the challenge becomes then how do we define the space in which we're going to use the question?
Yeah, I guess.
If you are a software developer, you always want to provide a software solution.
Yeah.
In the same way that if I'm a Clean Language provider, I always want a problem which Clean Language can solve.
Yeah, of course.
And the truth is that may not be the most pressing problem.
No, it could well be true. Do you feel like there are any sort of clear outer limits to Clean Language where?
My impression is that it works most effectively on humans.
Yeah. That's not a narrow area.
Doesn't work well with animals, except that there are an increasing number of people who use clean language in equine-assisted therapy.
Oh, really?
Now,
Wow.
I don't think they actually clean language the horses. I think they use clean language with the people who are working with the horses.
Sounds sensible.
So I think humanity is currently the limit.
Yeah.
There was a really, really interesting film. I've forgotten the name of it, which involved aliens from outer space. That
Arrival?
Arrival, the one where the time is.
Oh yes, I loved it.
Yeah, and that got a bunch of us thinking in the clean language community.
Oh.
Because what we pride ourselves on doing is modelling what the experience of the other person must be in order for them to say that. And what the woman in Arrival was doing was modelling.
Uh-huh.
Now, she wasn't using clean language to model, but she was using the modelling brain that clean language turns on.
Yeah.
That in order to use clean language effectively, you've got to think what's really going on for this person, and you've got to have a reasonably clean sheet of paper as you start that process.
Yeah.
So what she was doing in Arrival was that she was working out what needs to be true for these people to be, or these beings.
Yeah.
So maybe it doesn't stop at humanity. Maybe clean language principles can apply to space aliens.
Yeah. And even if it should happen to stop at humans, it's a pretty useful tool.
Yeah, but in order for it to be useful, there need to be humans involved in something which has a reasonable degree of complexity. If the whole thing is very obvious and you just need, if it really is tea or coffee, you don't need clean language questions. No. They work in all languages that we know of. Because they are based on human universals, things that have been established to be true for all humans.
Yeah.
All humans sort things into kinds. They all have a sense of boundary. So is there anything else? Suggests, can you go beyond the boundary of what you've just said? They have senses of time as space, so they represent time in a spatial way. Yeah. They experience time as linear, to refer back to the other thing. Linear and unidirectional.
Yeah.
And so on. And the clean language questions are based on those human universals, and therefore they appear to work for all available humans.
Yeah. It's super fascinating. I need to.
And that ties back again to the remote stuff that I also do, because I've fallen into a lot of stuff about working with remote teams and helping remote facilitators and remote meeting organizers to do their thing better by accident, because I was teaching clean language to people all over the place and it was too expensive to get them together.
Simple.
Yeah. So because we didn't have a choice, we worked out, well, how can we do the bulk of this teaching remotely? Mm-hmm. So I started off teaching this highly embodied, really rich interpersonal stuff over the phone.
Seems like a challenge, to say the least.
But if you've got no choice, you do it.
Yeah, sure. It's better than not doing it, I guess.
And then I moved on to doing it over Google Hangouts and Skype, and nowadays I do it over Zoom, and it's really, really good. And it's easy for people to get to those and all that kind of thing. And then my colleague was using clean language to help teams to develop as teams. Caitlin Walker, she does some really, really interesting stuff with clean language. Amazing results with, for example, teenagers not in education, employment or training.
Oh.
She and her team got a gig to, in the northwest of England, go round their houses, knock on their doors, make them come to workshops, get them talking to each other, and helping each other to get each other into education, employment or training. So these are kids between 16 and 18 years old. And they're not easy kids to work with.
No, I bet.
And she, in that kind of environment, success rates of about 20-something% are normal. Mm-hmm. Her crew were getting 70% plus.
Wow.
Back into education, employment or training.
Incredible.
Because the kids were working with each other. They were teaching each other what they knew. They were learning to ask questions and listen and pay attention and direct attention with questions. And if you think just how fundamental that kind of skill is to learning anything, to getting a job, if you don't have that background, that kind of base stuff, those kids are going to be struggling. But give them those base skills, and they're actually going to be ahead of the children who are coming out with academic qualifications.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
So back to what I do. So I took those same things and said, right, commercial teams, like groups of software developers who happen to be based remotely, look, we could do this with you, and then you as a team would work better together. Yeah. And so that's one of the things I do with Clean Language. I mean, it's really, really interesting.
Yeah, it applies in so many places.
So the one thing with a remote team, I think that there is a requirement for a shared language. And I only have English as my language, but you have to have some kind of language in which people can communicate. If people just drop me onto a call with people from Sweden, people from France and people from England, and we haven't got an agreement to use English as our shared language, I'm as much at a loss as anybody else.
Oh, yeah. So there's a sort of natural limit there as well.
Yeah, so that's another limit.
Well, a factor at least, maybe not a limit. And like the questions had been translated to different languages, you said?
Lots and lots of different languages. The translations are of varying quality. I've been told that the Swedish translation of the questions is a bit old-fashioned, sounds stilted.
It's interesting.
And a friend of mine has done a more modern translation, but it isn't official.
So there is an official sort of...
Yeah, it's official in the sense that there's a couple called Penny Tompkins and James Lawley who've been doing Clean Language for years and years and years. They're the people who originally studied what David Grove was doing, and their model of David's model is what I've learned, and most Clean Language people have learned somehow through Penny and James. There are other schools. David's ex-wife does some teaching. One of his ex-colleagues does some teaching. And Caitlin and various other people have learned quite a lot of stuff directly from David himself before he died. But a lot of stuff goes back to Penny and James, and they've had a website online for donkey's years, cleanlanguage.co.uk, which has got as many translations as they can assemble.
Okay, so that's official in quotations.
Yeah.
It's a good list to relate to then, I guess.
Yeah. So that's the place to look.
Yeah, it sounds like a great starting point. Another great starting point. And we'll, of course, link your presentation as well.
Yeah. So my website, judyrees.co.uk, has got loads and loads of blog posts about stuff about remote working, stuff about Clean Language, all sorts of interesting stuff. There is another website that I've got called learncleanlanguage.com, which is basically YouTube playlists about this kind of stuff.
Oh, perfect. Now I got my watching time cut out for me.
Yeah, but start where you are and start playing with those two questions. What kind of X? Is there anything else about X? And see what happens, because all sorts of interesting things will occur. Yeah, I mean, it's already popping up in my mind all the time. So, what if? Yeah. And of course, there are those two questions is not where it stops. There are more questions, but it's only about a dozen, depending how you count them. Yeah, I mean, even with just those two, you can do so much and get so many new ideas. So, yeah, thank you so much, Judy, for taking the time. This was super interesting. Thank you.
Let me put it this way, Mr. Raymer. The 9000 series is the most reliable computer ever made. No 9000 computer has ever made a mistake or distorted information. We are all, by any practical definition of the words, foolproof, and incapable of error.